Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. I have been wanting to make this video for quite a while, and this will be just the first of a series of tutorials that I will dedicate to each aspect of Hearts of Iron 4. Actually, there is another peculiarity about this video, as this was specifically requested by one of the members of the channel. In case you didn't know, if you purchase the Tier 3 membership to the channel, once per month you can request a dedicated guide on any topic you wish. Now, this video will be separated into 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to briefly check each tab and information in the game, assuming that you're opening OI4 for the very first time. In part 2, we are going to fight our first war against Ethiopia. We will use this theater to cover the basics for managing armies and planes in OI4. In part 3, we will focus more specifically on the request I received for this video, taking a look at the various options we have in terms of focuses and technologies as Italy. If that sounds interesting, then this is the right video for you. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments, but I would also recommend joining our Discord to meet our amazing community. Of course, if you have been following the channel and enjoying the content I make, please do not forget to support the channel by liking the video, subscribing and leaving a comment. Now, let's get started with our tutorial. And first of all, we're going to select single player, we're going to start a new game. The very first choice you have if you open the game for the first time is between 2 scenarios, 1936 and 1939. If you are a beginner, I would recommend going with 1936 as you will have more time to prepare for World War II. Now, for our selected country, their request was about Italy, and I'm glad about that because Italy is, in my opinion, one of the best countries to play to learn the game. So Italy is a great choice if you're a beginner. Let's go on and select Italy. Now, before we start, there are a couple more options that you have available here, and that is worth checking. First of all, you can select the difficulty, and my general recommendation would be to stick to regular. Regular is pretty balanced, and it's probably better to get used to it before switching to other things. Also, these other things give you extra political power, which will change many of my guides, so if you intend to follow my guides, it's better to stick to regular. I would strongly recommend not going for Iron Man, so you can always reload if you make a mistake. Generally speaking, I would recommend keeping these on, as otherwise the world can get a little bit crazy, which can be a lot of fun, but not great when you're trying to follow a specific strategy or a guide. And that's all, we can start. Now that we started the game, it is time to look at each of these tabs. I know at first this looked like a lot of stuff, it might be very confusing, but we're going to check together all of these things one by one, and you will see that it is not as complicated as it may seem. So let's start from the very top and click on our flag here. And here we get some very important basic information about our country. We see the portrait of our Duce, Benito Mussolini. We get some information about our ideology. We are fascist, so there are no elections, which is absolutely great. And the support for the various parties in our country. This is something you can mostly disregard. You want your party generally to have the majority, otherwise you may run into stability issues. Down here you can also see some of the national spirits, but you shouldn't worry too much about this. This is not something you can change unless you pick some specific focuses. We'll talk about that later on. National spirits are unique spirits that each of the major countries has in the game. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. You can see it easily from the color of the icons. This one is pretty bad. Now, one of the first things that we need to do here is we need to select a national focus. Generally speaking, with some rare exceptions, you always want to have a national focus selected when you play OI4. So let's go on and click here, and what happens is we get this huge focus tree that we get as Italy. And by the way, we're playing with no DLCs at the moment. I disabled all of them because assuming you're a new player, maybe you only got the base game. So for now, we're only going to look at what everyone has access to. With DLCs, this focus tree gets even bigger, I believe. But for now, it's already quite big. Not all countries have such big focus trees. Big doesn't mean that you need to research everything, of course. It means you have more options when it comes to development. However, this specific topic will be covered in part 3 of this video, which will be dedicated to focuses specifically for Italy. So for now, we're just going to pick one of the basic focuses, and then we'll talk about why and which other ones to pick later on. We're going to pick Italian highways for now. Next, down here we have two tabs, Occupied Territories and Manage Subjects. Manage Subjects is currently not available because we don't have any subjects at the moment. So let's look at Occupied Territories instead. This opens up another very complex looking tab, but again it's easier than it seems. The main thing and most important thing that we can see in here is a difference between some territories which are considered our core territories, that as you can see is all of Italy, and some territories which are not considered our cores. So these territories here, like Libya and the areas we control in Somalia and Eritrea, these territories are not considered our cores, which means they are occupied states. Now let me close this for a second, and if we left click on Zara, for example, and we go up here, we can see that this is an occupied state. We only get a small percentage of the resources of the state. As you can see, we only get 2% of the manpower, and we get minus 65% to the resources, and so on. While on the other hand, if we click on something like Milano, which is my city, in Lombardia, we can see that this is a core state of Italy. So here we get full benefits from all of the manpower, all of the resources, and so on. Going back to our occupied territories, what this means is that the core territories that we control in Italy are much more important than anything else we control around the world. Now, unlike other games, in OE4 there is no way to make a territory that you conquered a core of your land. So this territory here will not become our core. It doesn't matter how long it remains under our control, it will always remain as an occupied state. With one exception that we will mention later on when talking about focuses. Now, while core states are the most important and give you the most resources, occupied states must be managed, because in occupied states the population will start fighting against you. They don't want to remain under your occupation. And that's why we need an occupation law. There are several occupation laws available in the game, and these laws will determine how much unrest we get in the territories. Some of these laws are stricter. For example, brutal oppression will reduce the resistance by 75%, meaning the people in that territory will never revolt against us. Sounds good? Well, not really, because actually this also costs us a lot more manpower. And that is because to manage your occupied territories, you will need to use some of your divisions. Not the actual divisions that you see on the map. It is part of your manpower and equipment that automatically goes into the management of these territories. So what you want is you want to find the perfect balance, which, keeping it short, usually is local police force. It decreases the resistance, so they will not revolt, but it also decreases the amount of manpower that you need to use on garrisons, saving it for other more important things. So a good default law would be local police force. However, as you can see here, we have several different areas that we are occupying. Eritrea, there is Croatia, there is Greece, and so on. In some of them, we have a high level of compliance, which is this blue bar that you see here. The higher the compliance, the better it is. Higher compliance means you get a bit more resources, never as many as in a core state, but a bit more, and the resistance tends to be lower. So in the states which already have high compliance, we can go for a weaker occupation law, something like civilian oversight, because they are not likely to revolt anyway. So we can select civilian oversight for these two here and keep local police force for the other ones. Okay, let's say that we are done with occupied territories. Next, down here we have a very important tab which includes a lot of laws, advisors, industry and research, and military stuff. Now, we cannot cover this in detail in this guide, but let's briefly go over it. The first law that we have access to is the conscription law. This will determine how much manpower you have available. The manpower is the number that you can see up here, and this is basically the amount of men that you can use for garrisons and for armies. If this number goes to 0, you will not be able to recruit new armies, new units, and you will not be able to reinforce the units that you already have. So when you're fighting a war, if you're losing a lot of men, or you want to recruit new divisions, then you may want to increase your conscription law. For example, if we switch from limited conscription to extensive conscription, we get another plus 2.5% total population available for recruitment. Now again, without going in detail here, usually in most games you will stay between limited conscription and extensive conscription. Sometimes you may go into service by requirement, but as you can see, there are also some maluses in increasing the conscription law. In the sense that the more population you need for your army, the less population you have available for your industry. So as you can see, We have 10% population for the army, but we get maluses to the factory output, the construction speed, and so on. And the further down you go here, the bigger these maluses get. To be honest, I never really use these last two. On the other hand, the first two don't give you any bonuses, they just give you less population available for recruitment, so when you can switch from disarmed nation or volunteers only to limited conscription, it's always worth doing so. The next law is the trade law, and this determines how many of the resources you have in your country will be exported. Now, for this, it's time to look at another important tab. Down here you have several map modes. Let's go into the resource map mode, and from here we can see what we are producing in Italy. And as you can see here, we are producing some steel and some aluminum and so on. Now, these resources are available to us, but if we change from, say, limited exports to free trade, 80% of our resources will go to the market. Now, in this game, going to the market basically means that you lose them. It's you don't get anything in return. They are just lost. They are just gone. What you get in return is what you can see there. So you get extra construction speed, research speed, factory output, and so on. Now, overall, to keep it short, export focus is considered to be a very good and balanced option when it comes to the trade law. Other than that, it is very situational. Which trade law to pick depends on the country you're playing. When you don't have a lot of resources, it's usually better to go for free trade or export focus, since you don't have much to lose anyway. When you have a lot of resources and you don't have many friends, especially to import with, so this may be the case with Germany and Italy, limited export can be a better choice. Next, we have the economy law. The economy law determines how many of your factories are used for consumer goods. We will talk about this in a little bit. For now, let's just say that generally speaking, it is always better to go down when you can. So if you have civilian economy, it's better to go for early mobilization than partial mobilization, and then war economy should be your goal, as there are no maluses going down, only bonuses. Actually, we do have some maluses here. They decrease, they become bonuses, they become bigger bonuses. So whenever you can, upgrade your economy law by going down, except for total mobilization. Total mobilization gives you a -3% recruitable population, which can be a big problem. So try to go down all the way to war economy. Okay, the next three tabs are the same. They are slots for advisors, and here we have several different advisors that will boost our country in different ways. For example, this guy is the war industrialist. He will make us build military factories faster. And this guy, the captain of industry, will do the same thing, but for civilian factories. So depending on the situation and the strategy, you may want to pick different advisors. We cannot pick any at the moment, as you can see, and that is because we don't have the political power required for that. Now, most changes that you do to laws and government, including the ones I showed before, require this currency. This currency is the very first that you can see up here. It is called political power, and it increases daily. And that's all for what concerns the advisors for now. We may cover them more in detail in a future video. I will also skip entirely through these designers, as they are a bit more specific and situational, and also depending on the DLCs you have, you may not have access to them. So let's skip this line entirely. And down here you have military stuff. These guys are particularly important because in addition to their bonuses, they will give you a set amount of army experience every day. The second chief here will give you naval experience every day, and the third one will give you air experience every day. Again, this is a more advanced part of the game, so we will not cover it in this basic tutorial, but these experiences are shown up here, and they are very important when you need to make changes to your armies, navies, and planes. The last three slots here are for military experts. These guys will buff certain parts of your armies. For example, Guzzoni will buff our infantry attack and defense, while Ambrosio will buff the cavalry attack and defense. So depending on the type of army that you're going for, you will pick accordingly the advisors. Okay, we're finally done with the first tab, but don't worry, not all tabs are this complex, not all tabs have this many information. For example, the very second tab, called Decisions, is one that we can largely ignore for now. Here you have several decisions, including some special ones depending on the theater in which you're fighting or unique events for your country, but it's probably worth mentioning this only when we're actually using it. And in most runs, to be completely honest, you can ignore most of the stuff that you can see in here. So we can move on to the next tab already. Now the next tab is a big and important one, because in here we are talking about researches. And researches are very important. You always want to have these slots filled with researches. Now again, this was part of the specific request for this video, so it will be covered more in detail in the part 3 of the guide. For now, let's go on and pick some of the basic researches that you always want. Electronic mechanical engineering is one that you always want to research, as well as basic machine tools and construction 1. These are most likely the 3 researches that you will start with any country you're playing. The 4th one, which is not always available by the way, depending on the country you have a different set of research slots available. Italy starts with 4, but some of the minors starts with 2 or even just 1 slot, so you will need to make different choices depending on the country you're playing. With Italy, we have another one that we can use for support weapons 1. Again, I will talk about this more in detail later, but these are very safe and useful researches to always pick. Okay, let's move on to the next tab. This is a fast one because I almost never use this tab. This is about diplomacy, but instead of using this tab, I find it more convenient to simply right-click on a country which I'm interested in making diplomacy with. Now again, there are a lot of options down here, but not many of these options are options that you actually use. In fact, 90% of the time, what you're doing in the diplomacy tab is justify war goal and declare war. In OE4, to declare war on a country, you always need to have a war goal. So you always need to start by justifying one or get one in other ways, for example through focuses. Now, since Italy is a fascist, we are quite free in terms of justifying war goals. As long as we have enough political power, we can justify a war goal on any country in the world. When you play as democracies or non-aligned countries, rules are a bit different in the sense that you cannot always justify war goals. Another important thing to mention here is that if you justify more than one war goal at the same time, the time to get your claim will increase drastically, so it's usually better to justify only one war goal at a time. We will talk about the other options in future videos or in the specific runs. There isn't much else to say in terms of diplomacy for now. Let's move on to trade. This is an important tab, but not a very complicated one. Now, what you can see in here is the resources we are extracting, the resources we are exporting, and the resources we need. In the specific case of aluminum, we have an abundance of it, because we export only 25, we need only 3, and we extract 98. But in the case of rubber, we need 3, and we are not producing any. So when this is the case, you want to import the resources that you lack. So you go onto rubber, you select it from here, then you select one of the countries available. It doesn't matter which one, although if you can avoid using convoys, it would be better. So let's say the Dutch East Indies are a good option. And then you click this icon here to automatically import as much rubber as needed. To import rubber, you will need to use your civilian factories. We will talk about that very briefly, and we will also just trade a bit later. Let's move on to the next tab, which is about constructions. This is another important tab, as up here what you can see is how many factories you have available. And in this case we are talking about civilian factories. Civilian factories are used in this game for several things. One of the things you use them for is to produce consumer goods. This is a representation of your civilian economy. This is not part of the game, it's not something you manage, so in our case, anything that goes to consumer goods is completely lost. This means that out of our 21 civilian factories, 10 are gone. We should pretend that they don't exist. The other 11 that we have available at the moment should be used. They can be used, as we talked about earlier, to import resources. So if we import some rubber from the Dutch East Indies, we'll use one of those 11 civilian factories. The ones that remain should be used to build something in our country. There are a lot of buildings here, but we are going to keep it simple. What you want to build most of the time is infrastructures, as they boost both the amount of resources that you get. You can see up there, the resources are increasing for each level of infrastructures. And they also boost the speed at which you build additional buildings in the same region. The other two things that you want to build are civilian factories and military factories. Now, which one should you build? Well, that depends on the situation, your goals, the run. It's a very complex topic. I may dedicate a video to it, or we will cover it in a future episode. For now, as Italy, I would usually build civilian factories in Toscana and in Lazio. Now, that's all for now for what concerns the construction tab. Let's move on to production. And this tab is very important because it will determine which type of military equipment we are producing. Now, we cannot cover it in detail in this guide because it really depends on what kind of armies you're making. What we want to do, however, is we want to use all of our military factories at all times. So while civilian factories are used to build stuff, military factories are used to produce equipment. Now, among the information that you can see in this tab, there is a very important one, and that is the amount of equipment that we need for each type. So in the case of infantry equipment, we actually lack 5,577 infantry equipment to reinforce our divisions. While, for example, for light tanks, we have an abundance of them, and trucks, we also have an abundance of them. So it's usually a good idea to produce, of course, what you're lacking. In this case, we lack infantry equipment, so let's increase our infantry equipment production to, say, 7 factories. So for now, let's keep it very basic. I will just set the production as I usually do with my runs as Italy, and then we will cover it more in detail in a future video. Just keep in mind that you can also add the production of something which was not originally produced. For example, I want to have some towered artillery in my divisions, and we're not producing it at the moment. So I click up here, I open this additional tab, and I start producing some towered artillery. The same goes for trains. I want to have some additional trains, so I will start producing them. Okay, and that's it for what concerns our military production. For what concerns the naval production, I usually leave it quite free in my guides, but what I recommend doing in general is build your smaller boats first, so you can bring the other ones to the bottom of the priority, and you can assign more dockyards to these ones. When you see these icons here in gray, it means we don't have dockyards yet, but if we build additional ones, or for example when we finish building this one, all of these dockyards will go to this boat first and then to the other ones. The same thing can be done for infantry equipment. So for example, if we want the next few factories to be assigned to trains, we can just increase the production. We don't have these factories yet, but as we build them, they will automatically be assigned to trains. By the way, at this point you can also see that the lack of rubber that we mentioned earlier is affecting our production. So this number here is red, this number here is yellow, so of course we need the rubber for the wheels of our trucks and planes, and without it we cannot produce them efficiently. So what we need to do at this point, once you set up your production, you need to go back to the trade tab and you need to start importing what you lack. We lack some rubber, let's import it from the Dutch East Indies. Now keep in mind that you need to unpause the game for this to start working, and there we go. Now let's move on to the next tab, which is about recruiting and deploying your divisions. This is a very important tab, as here you can edit and make changes to your divisions. If you click here, you can actually change the way your division is built, how many infantry is in it, how many artillery, how many tanks, and so on. But this is an advanced aspect of the game, so we will ignore it for now. By the way, this is one of the things you need to use army experience for. Say that we want to add some artillery to this template. Well, then we would need 25 army experience to do so. So we cannot do it right now. Now, once you're satisfied with your template, you go on to train and you start adding the amount of templates that you want. Now, they go into groups. So in this case, for example, if we add, say, 5 divisions, the game will attempt to recruit 5 divisions and train them. And after they are trained, they will be deployed. And since here we are on infinite, the game will keep doing that. While if we select 1 here, the game will attempt to recruit and train a total of 5 infantry divisions, and then it will stop. At the very start with Italy, I usually recruit as many as 17 infantry divisions. Also remember that you need to set a location, you need to deploy them somewhere, and that place must be a core state. So here again you can see that we cannot deploy these divisions anywhere else but in our core states. Let's deploy them in Rome. The game will automatically deploy them when they are ready. Keep in mind that it takes quite a while to make your divisions ready. With Italy, I also like to add some light tanks at the beginning, so let's also recruit another 3 tank divisions. That's all for what concerns this tab. The next one is an easier one to look at, logistics. This one is just useful to get an overall idea of what we need and what we have. So when it comes to infantry equipment, for example, as you can see here, we have a deficit of 18,000 units. So we do need a lot of infantry equipment. You don't actually do anything from this tab, it's just to get an idea of what you have and what you don't have. Last tab here, we can skip this tab entirely for now. Also, this tab is affected heavily by some of the DLCs, so we will cover it in a future video. And we're done with all tabs, guys. I know this was long, but it's done. Now, there are a couple more things that is worth noting up here. We already talked about political power. Next, we have stability and war support. To keep it as simple as possible, you want these numbers to be as high as possible. So ideally, you want 100% stability and 100% war support. The higher they are, the more buffs you get. The lower they are, the more penalties you get, as you can see up there. Especially if these values are below 50%, you risk having some very bad events, which can affect heavily your run. Being at war, as you can see up there, because Italy starts at war with Ethiopia, decreases significantly your stability. So in this case we get minus 20% because we are at war. If we finish this war, our stability will go back to a safer 60%. We already talked about manpower, and by the way, you can notice how manpower went down compared to when we started. It was 700,000, and that is because we started recruiting new units. Whenever you recruit new units, your manpower, of course, decreases. Next, here you have an indication of how many factories you have, but actually this is a mix of military, naval, and civilian factories. Let's say that this number can be a quick indication of how powerful your industry is, but it's not as accurate. In here you can see fuel, and fuel is of course used to move your vehicles, may that be planes, boats, tanks, trucks, and so on. If you do not have enough fuel, then your vehicles will of course be a lot less effective. In here you can see logistics. This is the amount of trains, trucks and convoys that we use to, generally speaking, resupply our units. So ideally we want this number to be as high as possible. And finally, the amount of convoys that you have available. Convoys are used for trade, they are used to move your divisions over sea, and they're used to plan naval invasions. But those are all aspects that we will cover in future. We already talked briefly about these icons here, so no need to mention them again. Alright guys, we are at the end of part 1 of this guide. Now let's continue and get into part 2. It's time for some action, right? And we start at war with Ethiopia, so we will be ready for some action very, very soon. Now, Hearts of Iron 4 has, in my opinion, the best system when it comes to battles and wars. And the system of Hearts of Iron is not based on armies, it is based on individual divisions and front lines. So the first thing you want to do when you start a war is you want to select some of your divisions. So let's select all of our units in here. And then you want to left click on a general. We want our divisions to be assigned to a general. This also created an army. So now all of these divisions are grouped together in the same army. This will also give you a lot of additional options up here. We're not going to cover all of them for now, but the most important one, and the first one you need to select, is Frontline. Once you select this one, you can assign your units to different front lines. So for example, we could send them all at the border with the United Kingdom territories in here. But in this case, we of course need them to be at the border with Ethiopia. So if you just left click anywhere along this line, they will automatically form a front line along the entire front. If you don't want that, and you want them to only cover part of the front line, then you can right click and draw a line instead. So for example, in this case, they will only cover this little bit here. But in our case, we do want them to cover the entire front. So let's left click the entire front. Now our divisions will automatically position themselves to protect the entire front. Now all these divisions are grouped together, but we also need to assign them a general. Assigning a general is very important because generals give certain buffs to their units. For example, Giovanni Messe, which is our best general at the moment, will increase their attack, defense, planning, and reduce the supply consumption. So if we assign Messe to this army, the army will be a lot more effective. Let's go on and do that. In addition to having a general, armies can also have a marshal. So if we select this army and click here, we can assign a marshal to this army. So we go again up here, select the portrait and pick one of our marshals. Rodolfo Graziani is the best we have. For now, let's keep it simple. So you always pick the top one, basically, which is the one with the best stats. And Rodolfo Graziani will also buff the army. However, only 50% of these stats will go to the units of this army. The advantage, however, that a marshal has over a general is that if we create another army, let's go on and do it down here. So let's select all of the units we have in southern Ethiopia and create a new army. We can assign this army by right-clicking to the same marshal. So now we have two armies. Let's also select a general for this army. Let's go with Cavallero. Sure, why not? So now we have two different generals, each general offering 100% of these buffs to his units, both assigned to a marshal, which gives 50% of his stats to both armies. Okay, now that we have both armies, let's also create a front line down south. It's time to plan our very first offensive. Now, to capitulate Ethiopia, we will need to conquer their victory points. The victory points are highlighted on the map. The one with the star is the capital, the most important one. But the other ones are also highlighted on the map. Now, Ethiopia is generally very hard to capitulate, so we will basically need to take everything they have. And to do that, we need to plan an offensive. So let's go back and select our first army up here. And then we have two options for offensives. We can use an offensive line or a spearhead. They work in similar ways. This is an advanced topic and I cover it in a dedicated video. For the specific case of Ethiopia, I find spearheads to work a bit better. In general, you may want to use a balance between offensives and spearheads. Again, keep in mind that the goal is the same, but spearheads are a bit more aggressive in doing so. So let's plan a spearhead with our northern army. The spearhead is something we need to draw. So basically you draw the offensive you want your units to cover. But for now we'll keep things very simple. We will just draw a general spearhead all the way to Addis Ababa. Because our main goal at the moment is for these units to push as much as possible and as fast as possible into Ethiopia. We're going to do the same exact thing with the southern army. So again, we select the spearhead, we aim for Addis Ababa, and we give them an offensive command. Now both armies are assigned to an offensive. You can also see a green arrow up here. That means that according to the eye of the game, this is a good plan. It's a plan that is likely to work. Now they will not start attacking until we press these arrows. So when we are ready, we can press these arrows and our units will start pushing into Ethiopia. Now, the war with Ethiopia can be a little tricky. So what we are going to do, and what maybe Mussolini should have done as well, is we're going to use the other divisions that we have available. We actually have a lot of divisions unused in Italy. You can see that from the icons up here. This is something else I didn't mention earlier, but it's worth mentioning. These are notifications that you generally speaking want to check. So the first one tells us that we are lacking the production of fighters, tactical bombers and naval bombers. We are currently using those vehicles, but we are not producing them. I'm okay with that, so I'm just going to ignore this notification. You can right click it if you find it annoying. The second one tells us that our planes don't have any mission assigned, and this is important, we will talk about it in a little bit. The third one says that we have some divisions which are not assigned to any army. And this is an important one, because I want to assign all of our divisions actually. If you click here, it will select all of the divisions which are unassigned one by one. But if you shift click here, you will select all of them at once. Now I want some of our mountaineers, which you can recognize from this icon, to be assigned to this northern army. So I will quickly double click here, which will select all mountaineers. And then right click on our northern army. Now all mountaineers will be assigned and will move to join this army. I also want to give them a couple more infantry divisions to reach the cap of 24 divisions. Above 24 divisions, generals start losing effectiveness, so you don't want to go over this number. Now we can shift click here again and assign all remaining divisions to the other general. In this way, both generals are basically capped in terms of units, and all of our units will take part in the push against Ethiopia. Some of the other notifications up here, decisions available, but as I said, we can ignore this for now, so we don't care. And the final one tells us that we are at war, and if you click it, you can get an idea of the war. The war just started, so the losses are still at 0, but in here we can get an interesting idea of the overall balance of forces. Now the balance of forces is in here, but especially in the fielded manpower, which is, as you can see, is much higher on our side. You can also see that we have 46 divisions, while they have only 5 to 17. Of course, we don't know the exact number. And our industry is way more powerful than their industry. So things are looking good, but we shouldn't underestimate them. Right, Mussolini? Now, before we start our offensives and try to take down Ethiopia, we need to assign our planes, because planes play a very important role in Hoi 4. And for that, I would recommend selecting the air map mode, which you can do from down here. In this map mode, first of all, you can see our planes in each airfield in which they are based. And then you can see the air regions in the game. So in the area in which we are fighting, there are basically 3 regions. There is Danakil, there is these Ethiopian highlands, and there is Ogaden. Now, when you assign planes to a region, let's say we select the planes that we have in here, we give them a mission, and for now, again, we keep it simple. The 2 missions that you want to give them are air superiority for fighters and close air support for CAS. And then we right-click in the region of Danakil. If we unpause the game, you will see that this region becomes green. What this means is that in this region we have the air superiority. And that's quite easy against Ethiopia because they don't have planes, so we will always have the air superiority. Now, the air superiority is going to significantly boost our units, so it will make it a lot easier to push into Ethiopia. So we want to have green regions everywhere in here, which means we're going to assign actually all of our planes to Ethiopia. We can select all of them, give them all some commands, send them all to this airport here, and click on the other 2 provinces in Ethiopia. Now, in this case, we only have slots for 600 planes in here, so probably we are sending a bit too many. So we can select some of them from here. Say I will select these fighters and I will send them actually to this airfield and assign them to this region. And maybe some of the CAS as well. So let's send them to this region, maybe a bit more. Let's send them to this region. More or less we want to split them evenly between the several regions. Another options that you have in terms of planes, and this can be very convenient, especially when you're a beginner and you don't want to keep up controlling your planes constantly, is you can also select all of them. Let's do that now. You can do it from here. And then if you shift click, you can select one by one all of the planes that you have available. Let's make sure that they all have assigned these 2 missions. And then you can click up here. And this will assign all of the planes to this army, and then they will automatically spread around and micromanage themselves to follow the army effectively. If you want them to follow both armies, then you select all of the fighters, you split them into half, or better, you select half of them, and you give it to the other army. Then you do the same thing for CAS. So this can be convenient if you don't want to micromanage your planes. Now, generally speaking, my rule when it comes to the war in Ethiopia is once the air is entirely green, I start my offensives. Let's speed up the game a little bit. Let's wait for our planes to get down there. This is fine. We have green air almost everywhere, which means we can safely start our offensives. Now, before starting the offensive, let's select our marshal. And in here, there are a couple more very important things. The first one is this little icon here. It's easy to miss it, but it's one of the most important ones. Now, this will be part of an advanced tutorial, but supplies play a very important role in every war. And increasing the motorization priority by clicking here once and then again twice will boost by a lot the amount of supplies available to these armies. The other thing I like doing here is I like changing these from balanced to aggressive. This means our units will push a bit more aggressively. Generally speaking, this means pushing faster and taking more casualties. And against Ethiopia, we're okay with that because we want to end this war as fast as possible. Alright, now everything is ready, so let's press here, left click this one, and as you can see now our battle plans became active. Let's unpause and see what happens. And what happens is that now you see these little bubbles with numbers on top. To keep it very simple, if the bubble is green, you're happy. If the bubble is red, you're not happy. When this number reaches 100, we win the battle and we move into this region. So let's continue and see what happens. See, the number is increasing. We're getting closer to 100. 97, 98, 99, 100. So at 100 we broke the enemy division. It is now retreating and our divisions are advancing. There we go. And we are being successful in the south too. In the south, actually, you can see us attacking them in here. You can see the arrow from the bubble. But they're actually counter-attacking us here. It doesn't look so because this guy is facing the other way. That's probably why he's not successful. But these guys are actually attacking these divisions. So they have the little arrow pointing at us. The number is green, meaning we are doing great. Now, during the war in Ethiopia, we get several events. For this first one, I find by any means necessary to be the best choice. So let's go for it. And let's continue with our pushes. Now, we were successful pushing the second province here, but oh, we have a red number here. That's bad. But no reason to panic yet. Numbers can change. So maybe this is red because not all of our units are attacking at this time. And here, let's talk about another very important aspect of the game. Now, your units are automatically moving around. As you can see, for example, this guy here decided that it's a good idea to go here instead of keep attacking from here. Sometimes they do the right thing, most of the time they don't. And here is where micromanaging your units comes into play. Micromanaging your units means that instead of relying on this battle plan, you select them individually or in little groups and you tell them what to do. For example, against Ethiopia, I find it very effective to select something like 3 divisions and tell them to push on the left side. So if you right-click any province, the units will move to that province. If you keep pressing shift and you right-click several provinces, the units will attempt to follow the path you indicate. So for example, I want these 3 divisions to push from here into here, and then to keep pushing along the western border of Ethiopia. So I'm still pressing shift and I'm clicking all of these provinces. So ideally, we want to break their front and keep pushing along this side. Also, in here we have a red number and this guy is moving there. I don't want him to go there, so I will right-click here and see if this helps. Now, the number is still red, but it increased a little bit, which is a good sign. They have a lot of divisions in here, which is why we are struggling to push. They have 4 divisions in here and we are only pushing with 3 divisions, because these guys are currently not pushing. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because while these divisions are defending here, they cannot be defending in other areas. So maybe this is the right time to push these 2 divisions since they are weaker and see if we can break through the front in this area. Meanwhile, they also don't have many divisions in the south, so our southern offensive is being very successful. Now, another example of micromanagement is, let's see what this unit is doing. Now, this unit is attempting to go there to continue the push. I don't want them to do that. This region is undefended at the moment, so why not pushing it? So again, I will shift click and tell this unit to keep pushing in this direction. Same for this one. Now, more expert players will almost exclusively use micromanagement when pushing with their divisions. You don't have to do so, you can also rely on battle plans, but I find a mix of battle plans like these and some minor micromanagement to be a very good balance even for beginners. So let's continue and see what happens. Meanwhile, as more of our divisions are now attacking on this side, the number became green. We successfully pushed this province here, and now we are attacking these guys from multiple fronts. We're also attacking in here, and while the number is red, we are stopping these units, so they will not be able to move and reinforce the ones that are under attack. Now, in a situation like this, if you were able to completely defeat these units and take this province, the ones in here would be encircled. Meaning, when the number gets to 100, these units will be completely destroyed. This is a bit difficult to do with infantry, a lot easier to do when you have motorized or mechanized vehicles. Now, we got a new notification saying that we have insufficient resources. We lack chromium, and that's because we finished building some of our smaller boats, and now we need chromium to build these larger ones. However, for example, I don't care much about these larger boats, and I don't want to import chromium. So I will decrease the production to the minimum, and I will start producing something else instead. Some additional convoys may be convenient, and they are very cheap. So by readjusting the production, we don't need to import additional chromium. Meanwhile, as we pushed northern Ethiopia, we got success in North Ethiopia, and that's a very nice message, because it gives us some stability, war support, army experience, and command power. We completed our first focus, which means it's time to continue with the second one. And for the second focus, we are going for steel industry in Terni. We are going to talk about focuses very shortly, after we are done with the war. Now, while a large number of their divisions are pinned in here, they don't have enough divisions to cover the rest of the front. So our units are able to advance almost without resistance everywhere else. Now we also got another event, and this is a historical event, so we can send a ultimatum to this little state in here and annex them if they accept, which they always do. So let's send a ultimatum. And they accepted. So they became occupied by us, and they also gave us a very convenient 2 additional divisions. We can assign these divisions to any army. We can also create a new one just for them, which may be convenient at the moment, and give them a very small front line to cover this area. In this case, we can use an offensive line, but since I don't see any Ethiopian division in here, we can just try to take this victory point. Meanwhile, as we keep advancing along the border, we can split off some of these divisions to try and take some of the victory points. Of course, our primary goal is conquering Addis Ababa. If we can do that, then it would be great. I can see that this guy is trying to move in there. I don't like that, so I will attack him to stop him. We don't actually need to defeat him completely. We just want to stop him at this time. Okay, we got success in South Ethiopia as well, because we were able to push them. And this completed a focus for us. I will mention this in a little bit. Look at this. This is great news for us, because they have a lot of divisions, probably most of their divisions, completely encircled and blocked in these 2 provinces. Now, these guys will not be able to do anything anymore. If we keep attacking them, we will destroy them completely, but we don't actually need to do that, because what we need to do is we just need to take the victory points to end the war. And this war may be over very, very soon. Now, from time to time, you can click here and check the status of the war. Up here, this red bar shows how close Ethiopia is to capitulation. The more victory points we control, the closer they will be to capitulating. Keep in mind that in Hoi 4 there is no middle way. You only win the war when all of your main opponents completely capitulated. And it looks like we will be able to easily take the last victory points on this border, while all of their divisions are completely pinned. So this is the new capital. Let's see if taking it is enough to end the war. And it is enough to end the war. The war is officially over. Now let's very briefly go through the peace conference. When the war is over, a peace conference will trigger. Now this is an easy one because there is only us and Ethiopia in it, so there isn't much to do. We have, however, a couple of options. For example, we could decide to liberate Ethiopia, meaning we will create a lot of smaller independent states in here. We could create many puppets in here, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to fully annex Ethiopia at this time. So we select take state, we select all of them, make sure that they all have our little flag in here. We submit demands, and now Ethiopia is under our control. Let's confirm and exit, and that is it. The end of the war. Now all of Ethiopia is an occupied state of Italy. Now, this also ends the second part of this tutorial, the basics about fighting a war and managing your armies. Before we end this video, let's briefly go into the third part of the video, more specifically aimed at focuses and researches. Let me talk about the focuses for Italy. Each focus tree is different, so depending on the country, of course, you have different focuses. What they usually have in common is some of the focuses are usually aimed to boosting your industry, these ones in the case of Italy, and you can make several choices. You can boost your dominions, like Eritrea, Libya, Ethiopia itself, or you can boost the mainland, which is what we are doing now. And even when you boost the mainland, you have several options. For example, you can boost the northern industry in north of Italy, or the southern industry in the south of Italy. Then you have several focuses aimed to boosting your armies, your planes, and your navies. Finally, here to the right, we have a lot of political focuses. Now, specifically in the case of Italy, my favorite path is the one that leads to Mare Nostrum. And that's because Mare Nostrum allows you to reform the old Roman Empire. In addition to being Mussolini's dream, forming the Roman Empire has a unique perk, in the sense that I mentioned earlier that occupied state will never become core states. Well, there is an exception to that. In the case of Italy, if you form the Roman Empire, you can reclaim as cores all of its territories. And if you know the Roman Empire, well, that's pretty big. That's all of the Mediterranean land, all of the Balkans, Turkey, Spain, Portugal, France, all of the United Kingdom, Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, all of the southern part of Germany, Switzerland, all of that can become a core of Italy. So that's why going for Mare Nostrum is by far my favorite path for Italy. However, rushing it, so going down this path and trying to get to Mare Nostrum as fast as possible, is not going to be as easy, in the sense that in order to recreate the Roman Empire, you don't only need the focus, you also need to control everything that borders the Mediterranean Sea. So all of these provinces must be already under our control before we can form the Roman Empire. So my favorite path in terms of focuses for Italy is a mix of boosting our economy early on, which gives the best results in the long term, followed by some political decisions that will allow us to expand early on and quickly. And these, for example, involve going for foreign affairs, Balkan ambitions, which gives us the option to peacefully puppet Yugoslavia, then Pact of Steel, Italian irredentism, which gives us the option to unlock claims on Greece and Turkey through focuses. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, fabricating the claims manually takes time. For example, if we wanted to fabricate a claim on Bulgaria, which is something we're going to do later, well, this is going to take 230 days, so that's quite a long time. And if we try to fabricate more than one claim at the same time, that time will increase massively. So getting some of your claims through focuses, manually justifying some other ones, and tricking some other countries into joining the war is what allows us as Italy to take all of the Balkans at once. Yugoslavia, Greece, Turkey, Bulgaria and Romania will be under our control before World War II. But since you specifically asked why I go down this path, well, that is the reason. Through these focuses we can go for an early expansion. Through these focuses we can get a booster to our early economy. And then since it would still be too early to rush Mare Nostrum, we also boost our armies a little bit with some of the focuses in here, while we mostly ignore the naval focuses and the air focuses. And that's pretty much it when it comes to focuses. Then if you have some more specific questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. I will answer all of them. Now, the other specific request was about technologies, which ones to get and why. Now, when it comes to researches, let's briefly look at each tab. I will mention the most important researches for each one of them. But do keep in mind that the researches in part depend on what you're going for. If you're going for infantry-oriented armies, you need certain researches. If you're going for tanks, you need other researches, of course. In my run with Italy, I usually focus more on infantry, and so all of the researches up here for support and infantry equipment will be incredibly important. As a general rule, you want to keep up the technology with the year, or even research it a little bit in advance. So this one is almost 2 years ahead of time, so it's too soon to research these two. But this one we were behind, so we started researching it. And as we get closer to 1938, we will try to keep up with our researches. Now, trucks, luckily we already have them unlocked. This is a very important research. But mechanized and advanced mechanized are only really important if you go for mechanized and armored divisions, which we're not going to do early on with Italy. Special forces are very situational, and yes, mountaineers are nice, but since we only have a few specialized forces, upgrading them buffs only a small part of your army. So generally speaking, I do not invest too much in these researches. Also keep in mind that with some of the latest DLCs, there are more options in here. Support companies are also incredibly situational, except for the engineer company, which is always good and always worth researching. The other ones largely depend on what you are going for. This would require a dedicated video, so we will not cover this aspect in this video. I will also skip entirely this tab, first of all because if you have the No Step Back DLC, this tab looks completely different. And also because with Italy, I do not research and make tanks. Tanks require bigger investment in terms of the economy. And with Italy, we have a fairly weak economy early on, although it becomes incredibly powerful later on. So I find it better to invest in boosting our infantry and planes rather than investing in tanks. That's just a path though. If you wanted to make good tanks, especially light tanks, or add some tanks to your infantry divisions, you could totally do that even as Italy. It's just not my strategy. The artillery tab is very important because in here you have both artillery and anti-air, which are very, very good. They are both used both as support companies and as line battalions. We haven't talked about that in detail in this video, but generally speaking, both support companies, artillery and anti-air, are almost always worth it. So you want to research these technologies. Upgrading anti-air is not as important. Upgrading artillery is quite important. On the other hand, anti-tank is very situational and not particularly useful in single player because the AI tends not to make proper armored divisions, so you don't usually need anti-tank. I usually entirely skip the naval tab, and that is because you don't really need to upgrade your navy to get the naval superiority and pull off naval invasions, which is ultimately what matters the most when it comes to the navy. And we can save these research slots to keep up and even be ahead of time with the other researches. Now, the planes tab, keep in mind that this is the simplified one without DLCs. If you have the By Blood Alone DLC, this will look differently because you will have access to the plane designer, similarly to tanks. Again, that's a bit more advanced. Generally speaking, however, what you care about the most are regular fighters and close air support. So only these two types of planes here. Naval bombers can be useful but are not needed. Heavy fighters are less effective than fighters. Tactical bombers and strategic bombers are very, very situational and much less effective than close air support. So if you want to stick to the basics, you just need close air support and fighters to have success. Next, we have the engineering tab. In here there are two researches which are mandatory, the very first one, and then radio, which boosts all of your units. Everything else in here is very situational and you don't always research it. I almost never research the stuff that is in here. I often research this one, but more rarely the ones below, which boost your research speed. When it comes to the industry tab, on the other hand, you want to research most of the stuff in here, especially these three lines. So this one here for tools, first one is absolutely mandatory. One of the two between concentrated and dispersed. This is a very complex topic, but I have a dedicated video on this matter, so you can find it on the channel. And the constructions. The other stuff is more situational. You can mostly avoid researching it, but for example, as Germany, you lack rubber terribly, so researching some of these rubber technologies with Germany is convenient. With Italy, we are going to ignore it, but for example, we are going to research synthetic oil experiments because this one is required for one of the focuses, specifically this one. That's an example of a situational research. Otherwise, I would not research this. Now, if you check my dedicated guide for Italy, you can also find a list of researches down below, so you can see my priorities and my choices. Really early on there are not many choices that you can make. Later on you will need to choose between investing in your infantry, artillery, or investing in tanks if you go for that, or going all in on planes. So later on some additional choices are available. And guys, I always say this, there isn't just one good choice in the game, you know. You can have success with tanks, you can have success with infantry, you can have success with line artillery, as I showed in one of my recent videos. So my suggestion overall, especially if you're a new player, is, well, first of all, maybe follow my guide. Try to follow it as closely as possible to see if it works. And then experiment by yourself, try out different things and see which one works best for you. This video is already insanely long, I'm sorry, but I really wanted to cover all of the basics. I think we managed to do that. And for you who requested the video, I hope I answered your questions, but feel free to ask more in the comments. And then if you want next month, again, we will have another dedicated guide and I can cover more topics you're interested in. So I would say that's all for this first episode. And guys, since this is a new format, I would really appreciate it if you could let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Of course, this guide might be a little too basic for some of you, but I will cover more advanced aspects of the game in future episodes. Naturally, if you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to support the channel by liking the video, subscribing, and leaving me a comment. And if you stayed with me until now, thank you for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye!